So this could not be a more apt moment to have you with us. We're incredibly grateful that you're here. We've all seen the publication of the outline of the ELMS, the new agriculture bill, and I know we all have a lot of questions about that and also about everything that you were revealing this morning about new funding for areas of outstanding natural beauty. So, George, with many thanks, over to you.
Right, well, thank you very much, Rosie. And look, it's a real pleasure to be here, and I want to sort of commend the work that the Cherry family have done over the last 5 or 6 years to bring this event together, because I think everybody attending this event, everyone in this room, are in the vanguard of a new movement. But in many ways, it's a new movement that is rediscovering something that is as old as terrestrial life itself. And that is the unique and extraordinary value of our soils and the importance of soil health to the cycle of life. And there are many, many exciting developments that are taking place in what's now being called regenerative agriculture. These are things that we want to support as a government. And I think there's a growing interest in this agenda. I think documentaries like Kiss the Ground have raised awareness about this. It's got farmers thinking about how things could be done differently, rethinking perhaps some of the traditional skills of farm husbandry that we maybe lost sight of in the post-war agricultural revolution. But my own interest in this area came a little bit earlier, really, than that documentary. And that's because I studied horticulture at Agricultural College. And 3 years ago, I read an old book that was written by Sir Albert Howard. Those of you who are interested in this thing might also have read the book. But it was called An Agricultural Testament. And Sir Albert Howard was one of the great agronomists of the early 20th century. And he recognized the importance of soil health to fertility and to productivity, and recognized that if you got soil health right, lots of other things followed. And in that book, he's scathing. And this is, bear in mind, between the wars. This was written in the late 1930s based on research and observations he did during the 1930s. He was scathing of what he termed NPK farming, where we had been reduced to seeing the soil just as a medium to grow. And that actually what we needed to do instead was to recognize that soil is a living thing, and that it's not just about the nutrients that the soil holds, it's about that all-important and quite magical mycorrhizal activity, the relationship between the fungi and the bacteria in the soil and the minerals in the soil and the plant roots and all the other life that is contained within that. And I think at the heart of this movement is a view that we should move away from what Sir Albert Howard called the banditry of trying to mine agricultural land rather than nurture it, and to recognize that it's a living, valuable resource that we need to nurture. And I think what we're starting to see today in many progressive farms and across right around the world is perhaps a bit of a fusion of some of the best technology and science available to us today with that age-old art of good farm husbandry, and in particular, good soil husbandry. And I wanted to touch on a few areas where I think we're seeing some really innovative work being done. The first is, we know that ploughing and tillage or cultivation is incredibly damaging to our soils. It can be damaging to both the biodiversity and, of course, it's a key source of carbon that is released. And I think there's some growing work going on. Lots of farmers now looking at min-till or even no-till approaches. Paul Cherry was telling me earlier that min-till's not the real deal. You've got to do no-till, and that's what they practice here on this farm. But there will be different systems that work for different sectors. And indeed, recently I was talking to a brassica grower, a very large producer of cauliflowers and kale and so on. And they've actually been experimenting with strip tilling. recently, and that's something that can work in a row crop situation for those crops that are grown in rows rather than on a more arable type system. And what they've noted is that within 3 years, they report that their earthworm counts on that soil where they've adopted strip tilling has actually trebled in just 3 years. Now, if you take the earthworm count as being indicative of what else might be going on in the soil, it really does bode well, because I think it shows that some simple changes done at scale across the farmed landscape could actually lead to some considerable changes. The other thing that this particular farmer had noticed is that an over-reliance on fungicides to prevent fungal diseases in the brassica crops was having an unintended consequence of, in some cases, breaking down some of the natural waxes on the leaf of the plant. And so paradoxically, prophylactic treatment with the fungicides was actually, on one level, undermining the plant's natural healthy resistance to those fungal diseases. So again, they were reappraising the way that they deploy and use fungicides, using them more judiciously, more sparingly, embracing some of the concepts on integrated pest management, something that's been talked about for a very long time, but which we're now starting to see people seriously develop. I think in other areas, we're seeing some really important progress on things like green fertilizers. We know that 55% of the carbon emissions from agriculture are linked to synthetic fertilizer use. And the development of green cover crops, crops like Phacelia that fix nitrogen in the ground, improve the soil health, improve the biodiversity in the soil, can act as a food source for pollinators, but also crucially fix nitrogen into the soil so that farmers don't have to buy synthetic fertilizers, has been a really important step forward. And I think as well, we're seeing changes in other areas, including when it comes to grassland, with increased interest in lower input systems on grassland, relying on leguminous mixes where you get nitrogen fixing, flowering plants into the pasture so that you can, again, reduce your fertilizer use, which is going to be of critical importance. And on the arable sector, we're seeing a growing interest for those farms that are in countryside stewardship currently for some of the options around grass lays. Again, giving the soil a rest, making sure that we have nitrogen-fixing flowering crops that are in that grass mix, nurturing the soil, leading to more invertebrates in the soil, which in turn has knock-on impacts for farmland birds as well. And we're also seeing the development of new ways, new practices of pasture-based livestock, recognizing that actually the perception that some have that ruminants like cattle and like sheep are inherently bad for our environment and a negative force can actually, in a permanent pasture type system and pasture-based systems, be part of that cycle of life. And that if we can revert to more of a pasture-based system, that's going to be helpful. So these are just a handful of the creative ideas that I know many are pursuing. I think everyone recognizes that we need to change our approach to tackle the environmental challenges, both on climate change, but also on biodiversity. And leaving the European Union gives us, as a country, a great opportunity to show the world how we can do this. An opportunity through this 7-year transition to completely reorder the incentives in our system so that we support a regenerative agriculture. And that is precisely what we want our future policy to do. And we've broadly set out 3 key components to future policy. In a week or so's time, I'll be saying more about the sustainable farming incentive. This is going to open universally to everyone who wants to join it from next year. And it's going to be very much about incentivizing holistic whole farm approaches to improve sustainability. We will likely start with a focus on soil, since everything, in my view, starts with soil health, but we will be developing it in the years ahead to cover hedgerow management, sensitive hedgerow management, integrated pest management, and others beside. There's also going to be a second element called local nature recovery, which will replace countryside stewardship. Unlike countryside stewardship, there's going to be much more potential in the local nature recovery component for collaborative working, group working, working at a geographic scale so that we can get wildlife corridors and so on. But the objectives and some of the interventions will be familiar to those of you who are in countryside stewardship, since it will replace it. And in the interim, while we establish that new scheme under local nature recovery, we will be expanding the budget in countryside stewardship and seeking to drive up participation rates in countryside stewardship so that it can be a stepping stone to that future scheme. And then the third element is what we're calling landscape recovery. And that is very much focused on land use change. New woodland creation, re-wetting our peatlands. We're looking, for instance, at other options, such as whether some landowners, where they're willing to do this, might want to designate their holding as a national nature reserve, and we might work to bring to bear investment into those areas, support that designation, maybe seek some conservation covenants as well, so that we can make a big and rapid move towards our objectives of protecting 30% of our land by 2030. Now, initially, a lot of the funding for that landscape recovery work will come from the Nature for Climate Fund, but as we phase out the BPS, more of it will be switched to that particular component. And broadly speaking, overall, we envisage that it'll be roughly a three-way split in the budget between these three types of scheme, although it's also important to note that we don't see these schemes as being like the old EU pillar structure, where budget was trapped in one pillar and could not be transferred. We see these schemes complementing one another, and there being a continuum of objectives throughout. The final thing that I wanted to say, as Rosie pointed out, today we've published our response to the review into protected landscapes run by Julian Glover. We agree that in those protected landscapes, our national parks and our AOMBs, we should be doing more for nature and for nature's recovery. And I think the measures I've set out will enable us to do just that. But we've also today announced a new Farming in Protected Landscapes fund that will support both our environmental ambitions in those protected landscapes, but also, crucially as well, improve public access into those areas. So there is a huge amount of creative thinking going on in this area, great potential for the future. We've got a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity as we leave the European Union and change the emphasis of our policy to really take this forward. And I look forward to working with all of you as we design and finalise the detail on each of these schemes. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, George. It's fantastic both to hear your passion, your knowledge, your attention to detail, the stuff you know. It's really, really impressive because it's such a huge brief and such a huge subject. So can we get into a few bits of the nitty-gritty? For instance, I'm really interested in what you see the farm of the future, or indeed the farm of, let's say, the next 10 years while we transition. Is it a place that's about nature recovery primarily? In other words, is that going to be Elm's Prime's thing, or is it about growing food? Because all the way through your talk, you talked about nature recovery rather than growing food. And I think there's a tension. I mean, I know many people, me included, wanted to get good, healthy food considered as part of the public goods that Elms rewards. And I completely understand why that was rejected on the grounds that, well, you get some money for food, but you don't get any money for the hedge. But I'm still find that somewhere in it, I think it's difficult for people to know. And it worries me that, you know, people will get money for the hedge, but they'll end up being broke, and so they'll end up carrying on intensive farming.
Yes, and I think, look, there's this age-old tension between different groups, and you know, I've been doing this job in various guises now for about 7 years. I always say that if I say something that environmental groups like farmers assume the worst, and vice versa, if I say something that's welcomed by farmers, there's a tendency for green lobby groups to say, well, this isn't, you know, for the environment. And what I've been trying in all my time to persuade people is that actually sustainable food production and profitable farming goes hand in hand with our environmental objectives. They're not and haven't got to be in conflict with one another. Arguably they have been because of the course that was chosen in the sort of post-war era. But what we're seeing through regenerative farming is a reconciliation, if you like, of sustainable farming, profitable farming, with you know, things that are right for the environment. So the way we address this is by getting the incentives right in the schemes, and by being clear that we're about incentivizing sustainable agriculture. And so in the past, the old EU schemes for the environment were based on a principle called income foregone. And what that basically said is, we want you to do a good turn for the environment, but if you do, the most you're going to get out of us is compensation for your loss, and we won't pay you anything more. What we actually need to be asking is, if we want to get and achieve the biodiversity targets we're setting, all our other environmental ambitions, we need to get a step change in people's approach to soil husbandry in particular, right across the farmed landscape. And the question, therefore, isn't sort of how much compensation should we give people. It ought to be, how do we incentivize and make the payments generous enough to incentivize the right scale of uptake? And that's what we're going to do. So we're moving away from income foregone. The quid pro quo for removing an arbitrary area-based subsidy is that we should pay farmers properly for the environmental assets we want them to nurture. And we need to, it's going to be a big turnaround in a way, because in the past, those of you who fill out your BPS claims know that we have this concept of permanently ineligible features. And if you've got a water feature like a pond or a clump of trees or a bit of rough ground that has got a bracken on it and you don't, it's not grazable, well, that's currently deemed ineligible and doesn't get support. What we're actually going to be doing in future is paying people for those water features, paying them for having trees in the farm landscape, and that's the right way around it should be.
So still sticking with the subject of how we grow food and how we reward farmers, are there going to be rules and regulations about the use of pesticides, fungicides? How will that kind of figure out in this? Will you try to stop some, or will you penalise them?
Well, we've got a pesticides regime, which is done on a risk-based approach, and the trend over the last 20 years has been that as we've learned more about pesticides, we've tended to lose more of them, and fewer businesses are willing to make the investment to bring forward the next generation of pesticides. So I think what we are likely to see actually is more emphasis on improved plant breeding and different approaches to agronomy so that we can reduce our reliance on pesticides. And what we will do is, through the Sustainable Farming Incentive, we will be bringing forward basically an integrated pest management module that will be a holistic whole farm approach, possibly learning from some of the good work that organizations like LEAF have already done and seeing how we can scale that up. But essentially making incentive payments to farmers for actively embracing integrated pest management. So it's a combination of the regulatory bar and getting that in the right place based on the evidence, but then more broadly having a scheme that incentivizes IPM.
Okay. The question of measurement comes up across the board, whether you're coming from the point of view of the Das Gupta report into the value of nature, or you're just trying to think, what are you going to pay someone for preserving their soil, and how are you going to assess? I mean, how's the process actually going to happen? Because it is very complicated. I had some info from the Rivers people the other day, which was saying that at the moment, given the amount of resource that there is, the average farmer in Britain can expect an inspection visit only once every 263 years. So the point being, A, this is a great area for jobs, but there's going to be an awful lot of need for money, not just to subsidize farmers from one type of farming to another, but also to go around and look at people's soil. And how will that, I mean, are you going to let people self-report, or is someone going to come and look?
Well, of course, in some ways, this sort of challenge isn't new in that we currently have close to 30,000 farmers that are in countryside stewardship, and some of these options are similar. And we do rely on a combination of, self-declaration, and then using things like satellite imagery and invoices to check that people have done what they said they would do. I mean, we do need to get more trust into the system, but also there will be people that aren't worthy of that trust, and so we need a system of enforcement as well. Longer term, when we get to our final end state, the vision that I've got, once all of these components are out and once we've moved beyond the BPS, is that a farmer would be able to have a trusted advisor or agronomist, and it might be that there's a third sector organisation like the RSPB or the Wildlife Trusts that start to do this, or it could be a commercial agronomist, and that these individuals could be accredited by the government to both give advice and help administer the new scheme. And what we need to get to is, rather than sort of form filling and then the RPA saying, we saw a shadow on that hedge, we think you've told porkies about the size of the field, which is a sort of nonsense we've had with previous schemes. We need to get to a situation where a trusted agronomist walks the farm with the farmer, goes through each field, makes an assessment about what type of options might work on that particular soil type with that particular topography, what would work in different fields, sit down and, around the kitchen table with the farmer, help them craft a bespoke agreement that's right for their holding, and then to make visits maybe once or twice a year to give advice, but also, of course, to check that they're following the scheme. And I think we could get to a model that, rather than have form filling and people having to go on a helpline to the RPA when something goes wrong and have somebody who doesn't know their holding, get that to a much more human connection, where you could have a trusted, accredited agronomist that might be looking after, say, 70 farmers in an area. You'd have his mobile number, and they could work with you to make your own particular agreement work. That's where we've got to try to get.
Well, that's completely wonderful. I think everyone would agree that's a fantastic vision. Is it actually a realistic vision, given, I don't know quite how many farms there are, but if we divvy them up by 70, that's a lot of expertly trained agronomists visiting your farm regularly. Are we going to be able to afford it?
Yeah, I think that can be done. And so, a lot of farmers would already have, for instance, agents that they have to employ to fill out all their current forms and deal with their current schemes. So quite a lot already do this. In terms of the numbers, we know, we've done the work on this because Natural England already manage the higher tier countryside stewardship schemes. So we know what resource it takes to do that intensively. Roughly, as a Natural England advisor will be capable of handling about 80 farmers. And there's about 80,000 farmers currently claiming BPS. Probably not all of them would go into all of those schemes. And so you probably would need, in the region of maybe 600 to 1,000 people who'd be accredited. And I think that's entirely deliverable. There are people out there are third sector groups, wildlife groups, commercial agronomists who already give advice and would be able to play a part.
The new report from the Climate Change Committee, which has come out last night, this morning, is by far and away the toughest thing I've read about it, because it goes cross-government in terms of every department, what they have to do to step up to the climate change challenge. And one of the points it makes about DEFRA is that DEFRA has to be ready for anything between a 2 and 4 degree temperature rise, has to have incredible adaptation, and a big push of saying the more we can do now, the better it will be in the long run. Do you feel that we're at a good point now to bring farming into its role as a carbon sink and a contributor towards mitigating climate change, rather than what it's been up to now, which has actually been a cause of, it's been 30% of global emissions? And do you feel confident that we're on the right track now?
I do, and I think what I'd say is you have to distinguish between the sort of near-term challenge of carbon budgets 5 and 6, which are stretching, they are demanding, that's going to create some challenges. And the only way we will make a meaningful contribution to them is if we can make significant inroads in reducing fertilizer use and in enhancing our soils in such a way that they do hold more carbon. And the encouraging thing is, I think there's a growing understanding that if you manage soils in the right way, you can actually get them to hold more carbon, and you can actually get that to happen in a fairly short time scale. The longer term issue is, as we get closer to net zero in 2050, tree planting, new woodland creation, and peatland restoration will probably have to do all of the heavy lifting towards that in the final decade between 2040 and 2050. And of course, there's a saying that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. And so to get new woodland created and performing the way we need it to remove carbon between 2040 and 2050, we've got to be establishing significant increases in woodland in the next few years ahead.
Okay. I have about 3 more questions before I bring in the audience, but I will promise I'll do it soon. So one question I want to ask you is about local food and how this is going to work. I mean, there was a 134% increase in people buying local food at the start of the pandemic. So we know that people want to do it, are able to do it, and yet if you look around a lot of the local foodscapes, I mean, I certainly know where we are in Somerset, we've got one abattoir within about 80 miles, and abattoirs are closing. Things that actually really, that the government could do that would underpin local food networks are slipping away rather than coming forward.
Well, we're going to be looking at this. So Henry Dimbleby, as some of you will know, is currently doing a review on food and the food system in the round. And we will be doing a white paper on food later, and the food system later this year. And certainly one of the things I'm keen to do is everything we can to support what's been a growing trend over the last 25 years, and that is real consumer interest and engagement in this country in food provenance. You know, I've seen this change in my lifetime. My own family run a farm shop business, so it's something we've seen work. Some of you here will have seen the same trends. Supermarkets themselves, while often being very big enterprises, are often keen to try to source local produce in some of their local stores because they know that there's that desire for food provenance. So we're going to be looking at things like labelling, country of origin labelling, but also system of production labelling as well. And we'll be shortly doing a call for evidence on that to invite views. But then we'll be giving a wider commentary on how we might support the food system and bring that resilience, riding on a consumer demand for food provenance later this year.
So one of the things, and I'm pretty sure Henry touches on it because I've done quite a bit of work with it, is about, again, trying to boost the viability of local food by, for instance, procurement rules. I mean, surely one of the benefits of not being in the EU is that we can say X% for all public meals, schools, etc., can come within a certain distance. I know Italy tried to do it and they were stopped as it was seen as prohibitive ruling under EU laws. But are things like that so that would encourage small horticulture, smaller local networks, local jobs, locality, less carbon footprint, etc., etc.? And if that's in your vision, how will you financially support some of that?
Well, we will look at that because the government overall has a very large budget, or the public sector does, if you look at schools and hospitals in particular. So it is an area that we're looking at again. So we did, a few years ago, we launched something called the Balanced Scorecard, which was a new way of procurers assessing their food contracts, which required them not just to look at price, but also to look at the socio-economic impact locally, also to look at the environmental impact of what they were doing, and to look at the quality and nutritional value of the food. So we made some important changes 5 years ago. Those then became a legal requirement for Crown Commercial to follow in all of their government contracts. But I am interested in whether we could go further. And one of the lessons of the pandemic, which farmers and people in the food system have really seen, although we often like to be quite critical of supermarkets, or farmers in particular, I know do quite often with very good reason, something has happened in the last 12 months, which is having less food going through the food service sector and more food going through supermarkets who by and large do try to buy British, by and large do try to promote their brand as supporting British. One great big pictures on the wall of happy farmers' children picking up potatoes and so on. That has actually meant that farm gate prices have firmed up rather counterintuitively. And if we could get some of the food service sector, including the public sector, to get closer to what we're now seeing in some of those retail outlets, then you start to get the right kind of farm gate price.
Would you put in abattoirs?
Well, abattoirs, it's often raised, and it's something that we don't rule out. And in the past, particularly in very remote communities, island communities, government support has gone to get those. But actually, when we've looked at it as well in the context of transport regulations, for instance, we have lost quite a lot of abattoirs, but there's still quite an even distribution of them. There's a particular challenge in Scotland and in parts of Wales, but across England there still is a fairly broad range of abattoirs that are around. So it's something that we're willing to look at. But I think the bar has to be quite high to intervene on that, because we always have to be conscious that if you spend money on that, there isn't money to spend on something else.
So can we just talk about also new entrants to farming? Because everyone knows it's almost impossible, unless you've inherited a farm from your dad or mum or whatever, to get into it. And yet, tell me if I'm wrong, but this new scheme which is inviting farmers to retire and they get a lump sum, it's not obliged for that. I mean, they could then sell that farm to anyone they want. It doesn't, in fact, open doors to a 22-year-old who's just come out of agricultural college and wants to get 50 acres to get going on. What helps the government going to give that kind of individual?
Yes, we will be saying a lot more on this later in the year, and in fact we flagged that we would be in that consultation. So all of the evidence is clear on this, that we have a fixed amount of land. If you want to create new opportunities for new entrants, you also have to address the issue of how you support perhaps an older generation to retire with dignity. So we are looking at exit payments where we'll pay farmers basically 2.35 times the annual BPS payment they get in order to surrender their entitlements, and then either rent out their farm, which I think most owner-occupiers would probably choose to do, or indeed sell it, or to put it down to woodland is the other third option that we're looking at. Now, later this year, we've got an intensive piece of work that we're doing with the county farm estates, but also some of the larger private estates, because we intend to establish a fund that those estates can access to have much more of a business incubator model for some or all of their holdings. And so what we envisage is that a county farm estate would be able to access funds to, for instance, put in place mentoring and business support plans for new entrants, making sure they have a partnership with a private estate so that after, say, 8 or 10 years, a farmer who starts out on one of their starter farms has actually got a route to progress onto their own holding for the long term, making room for the next cohort of new entrants. Whether we could support, for instance, buyer groups, so that all of those new enterprises that are on a county farm holding would be able to get cheaper inputs because there would be support around them to have a joint buyer group linked to that holding. So there's a lot of really interesting things that we can do there. It is the essential part of the equation.
Yes.
But to answer your question, one thing I could have done is say it's a requirement that you must give your holding to a new entrant. I think that's too restrictive, and you'd probably find find some farmers not wanting to exit because they would doubt their ability to get an income from the rent. But if we get a reasonable number of farms exiting, the other thing I think we can expect to see is a moderation in land rents, because the truth is that roughly 50% of the BPS area subsidy disappeared within about 5 years into inflated land rents, and we need that to gently unwind so that we can get to a much more sustainable level of farm rents.
So you hope it will be okay, but you cannot guarantee that what, say, happens by the River Wye, where there are now 140, I think, individual chicken sheds that can take up to 40,000 chickens because you don't need planning permission, is not what some retiring farmer chooses to do.
Well, they have to exit farming, but they can continue to be, a contract farmer, and they have to surrender their entitlements.
Okay.
So, but you know, with all of these schemes, will they be perfect? And the answer almost certainly I can say is no. And it's why one of the things I've been trying to emphasize is that this journey is an iterative process in some ways. We've got very clear views on what we should do. But in the old EU world, what used to happen is there'd be 27, 28 countries arguing about what the policy should be. You would then have something of a sort of Frankenstein monster of a policy that wasn't easy to implement. But once it was decided, you were stuck with it for 7 years and nothing could be changed until the next go. What we've got the chance to do now is to get all of these schemes in the water, get them moving, try them. And if something doesn't quite work, well, then we can modify and adjust as we go along in the way you would in any other walk of life or in business. So many of you will be experimenting with different approaches to agronomy. You want that ability to be able to tweak and change things until you perfect it. And having that agility to be able to make iterative changes is quite important to the success of the schemes.
Fantastic. Okay, last question from me. There's a lot of worry at the moment about the new planning regulations, which are looser and which seem to be able to, they seem to give priority to the developer or the builder over nature, the greenfield site. I mean, in particular, the 3,500 homes that are possibly going to be put up on the borders of the net rewilded estate. And do you see that as a problem? I mean, I know it's not your department, and can you influence that? Can you make the priorities of DEFRA override that?
Well, look, we work very closely with MHCLG, and the important thing I'd say is that during the Environment Bill, we've got a commitment there to biodiversity net gain.
Yep.
We anticipate this will release around £200 million per year for investment in local nature recovery strategies, and also trying to make space for nature in new developments so that they're not just bland sort of houses that are dumped on the side of a town, that they've actually got space for nature within them. That's quite an exciting agenda. We are looking at certain things like, you know, the process really around environmental impact assessments and some of the habitat regulations assessments, which are, I'm afraid to say, having looked at them quite a lot, there's often quite a long, drawn-out, highly litigious system of assessment that goes on. But it doesn't always lead to the right outcomes or indeed lead to the right protections. And so what we're seeking to do is to simplify the process while making sure that we've strengthened the protections where they're needed. And that's the objective. And there's obviously a lot of anxiety and speculation about the planning bill, but I know that, you know, Robert Jenrick's also listened very carefully to some of the concerns that are raised, and I'm sure when he brings it forward, people will be reassured. Okay,
it's a very tricky one. Anyway, thank you so much for sharing so openly about so many things. Sorry, I've got my back to this side of the room. Can you, I can see firsthand, are we taking microphones around? John, do you think we should do them in groups of 3? No, all right, we'll take one at a time, but can you please keep questions short, because I can see there's going to be a lot.
Try and keep my answers short as well.
No, your answers can be as long as they like. And can you just say where you're from, so that we know where your question's coming from and such?
I'm Andrew Ross from Global Garden. I work on the bond market in green finance. And the UK Infrastructure Bank has been given 22 billion by HM Treasury, and it has a remit to invest in natural capital. But it hasn't yet identified a single investable project. Would it be possible for you to ask Rishi Sunak to tell the UK Infrastructure Bank to invest in green bonds that provide funding for regenerative agriculture? I'm actually speaking on this at 4:30 this afternoon in the fungi tent.
Good.
And I look forward to your answer.
Well, I can't guarantee that George will be there, but it's a jolly good question. Thank you.
Yeah, well, the short answer is we've set up a group to try to work out how we can make private green finance work, because it is, I think it's going to be absolutely critical, particularly I think when you're talking about land use change, so new woodland creation and peatland restoration. we actually need to be able to get institutional money and investment willing to invest in that. And I've had some initial discussions with the expert panel that are looking at this for us. And the key thing really is it all comes down to trust and integrity in the market and making sure that you've got a regulatory framework that is long-term enough that if you want them to put hundreds of millions of pounds on the line, they need to know that you're not going to monkey around with the regulations at some stage in the future. They need to have that that sort of bankability, a bit like we did really in the energy market with contracts for difference, for instance, and we can probably learn from that. And then you also, to get the big players, it's just got to have transparency in the market and integrity to make it work. So I'm not an expert, I'm afraid, in this area, which is why I've set up a group of people who are experts to look at it for me. But I can assure you that we're on the case because we see green finance as being a big part of the solution, as does the Treasury, because of course the Treasury are always looking for ways of finding other people to help share the burden of funding things.
Thank you. Okay. Yep. Where is the mic? You've got the mic. Thank you. And then we'll come to you.
Thank you, George. I'm Sharon Moat. I'm from a group called Revival, who are very passionate about our local chalk stream. You talk a huge amount, wonderfully, about soil, but integral to the health of soil is, of course, water. Mm-hmm. We're under great water pressures here, our source being groundwater. Will you campaign with us in order to give all chalk streams protected status? Because at the moment that isn't the case, and they are struggling dramatically. And secondly, as part of that, we also need there to be some form of better inspection and regulation of when things go wrong. And it seems to me that at the moment the Environment Agency really isn't fit for purpose. Budgets being slashed from 120 million to 40 million within 10 years means there's insufficient staff to come out and do the job that they need to. It's a misnomer. They don't care. There are other priorities such as flooding, pollution, of course, really important. But you know, you're sitting here in the Western Hills. This is the source of a very precious chalk stream and it needs protection, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So I can assure you that within the department, and this is something that my colleague Rebecca Power is very passionate about, improving the situation with our chalk streams. I mean, at the moment, they're all subject, of course, to our target around good and environmental status, as are all of our water courses. But we are going to set some new targets on water quality under the Environment Bill by October next year. And we will be looking at these sorts of issues and trying to unpack what is a sort of, at the moment, a composite target called good environmental status, which covers about 8 different criteria, trying to unpack it and target the things that really matter in individual areas, individual soil types and water types. So that's the first thing. The second thing is this year we've decided to double the spending that we put into catchment-sensitive farming. And if there's demand beyond that, I will increase it again in future years. And that's because working with farmers, giving them the right advice, getting them to put in place the right kind of cover crops, buffer strips from water courses and so on, reducing their fertilizer use, managing farm slurry in the right kind of way. All of that needs the right kind of partnership. And I think the right body to do that is Natural England. So Natural England run the catchment-sensitive farming scheme that we have, and we've just dramatically increased the scale of that. And we have also, I know there's been criticism of the Environment Agency, around some of their enforcement work on pollution. We did make clear last year when I was discussing their budgets with them that they had to sort of split the budget a bit so that they were able to do more by way of water quality work, and they did do that. And we are seeking whether we can find ways of giving them some additional money so that they can improve and do more enforcement work. But what will make a big difference in terms of farm pollution is that catchment-sensitive farming scheme.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, my name's Cindy Palmano and I'm a climate activist and I work with the regenerative agricultural movement. And thank you very much for everything you said and thank you, Rosie, really good questions as well. When you talk, I'm glad you mentioned the CCC report and there was also the UK CCC report last week with Baroness Brown talking
Yeah.
about adaptation and resilience, and how, in fact, the government has fallen behind 750,000 houses built that aren't fit for purpose. And you mentioned the 2 to 4 degrees. And I suppose what I think people don't really understand is what 2 to 4 degrees, that's mentioned a lot, 1.5, why are we trying to align with Paris? But 2 to 4 degrees, is, as I understand it, is pretty catastrophic. And so what we have going on here is like a timing misnomer. All of this is fantastic, but the reality is, what does 2 degrees look like? What does 3, 4 degrees? It's social collapse, isn't it? As far as I'm aware.
Well, my understanding, and I know that different people express different views on this. If we did nothing beyond what we've already done, the advice we've got is you'd probably be heading for 3 degrees by the end of this century. Now, the ambition that has been pushed to date in previous COPs has been to basically try and hold that at no more than 2 degrees, obviously. But what we secured in the G7 that's just taken place is really getting the 1.5 degrees back into view. And this is something that the United States have now, obviously with a change in administration, are now fully supportive of, something I discussed with John Kerry. And so, increasingly we're trying to bring that focus on 1.5 degrees back into view more clearly. And that will mean, more countries having to commit to net zero by 2050, and to important staging posts along the way, in the way that we've already done as a country. So I know there's always this challenge that more must be done, and we are trying to do more, but I can tell you this occupies a huge amount of time in government. We are serious about this. We recognise the scale of the challenge and the types of changes we're going to need to make. And in agriculture, the transformation that we are setting out over the next 7 years, is going to help play a part in that.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, that, though, and I think what came out last week in the adaptation report was that we weren't really doing, we concentrated quite a lot on flooding, but there's a whole lot of other things around how species will move, how soil will, water will run out, that aren't getting the attention. And it goes back to the lady, to the question from Sharon, I think, about how we've cut the budget of the OEP, and my God, we're going to need a lot of money, because is the money going to be there for both adaptation and the new types of farming you want to see?
Yes, I mean, one of the things about the report from Baroness Brown, so they didn't make a big deal of flooding, and when pushed, she said that's because huge amounts has been done to prepare us against future flood risks. So they acknowledge that the government on that front has done a lot more. When I discussed with her, for instance, so soil erosion is something she mentioned, but in the context of what we're discussing today, regenerative agriculture, min-till, low-till systems, emphasis on soil health and on water quality, reduced fertilizer use, all of that, actually, as well as contributing to reducing our climate emissions, will also make us more resilient. It'll make our soils more resilient to soil erosion from flash rainfall events.
Great, okay. Okay, whoever's got the microphone, can they stand up? Thank you.
John de Ramsey, farmer, the first chairman of the Environment Agency.
Ah.
I thought it might be relevant to say a few words about that and ask a question. I'm delighted to hear what you're saying about farming, and most of us can respond to that. What you're saying about the Environment Agency is wishful thinking. We fought all the time against the Treasury to get funding. I'll give you a simple example. The water companies are being blamed for sewage going into rivers at flood times. Why? Because the Treasury refused to allow them to spend the money. We wanted to spend a total of 12 billion, and they cut us down to 3. And surprise, surprise, we have pollution in our rivers because the Treasury don't really care. They don't think there's enough votes in the environment.
Well,
thank you very much.
I have very good relations with the Treasury, and in particular my ministerial colleagues. And all I can say is that caricature doesn't reflect Rishi Sunak's position. And indeed, one of the things that is going to happen through the Environment Bill is we will be setting legally binding targets on water quality, just as we did on climate change and carbon emissions. And once we did that through the Climate Change Act, in fact, Treasury understood that that's a legal obligation, and we've been taking the steps necessary to make sure we can get those carbon reductions. And I think it'll be the same on water quality as well. It is an issue that we're looking very closely at. In the next Ofwat pricing review, I want there to be a real focus in particular on phosphates, where we're seeing some problems from some of those sewage companies, but also as well the CSO problem. We're going to get more flash rainfall events. When you get that, you're having more of these instances of raw untreated sewage going into our water courses, and that's something we can't be relaxed about. We've set up a group that's looking at this, and we're seeking to address that in the next pricing round.
Great. Thank you.
Hi there, it's Adam Bedford from NFU in the North East. It's 5 years since the referendum, and the next 5 years could mean quite a lot for the State of the Union in this country. And I wondered if you had any reflections on agricultural policy in devolved nations and how, over time, they're going to interact together, bearing in mind that in places like England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, agriculture is such a bigger part of their economy than it is in England. And just some reflections on what those next 5 years looks like.
Thank you very much.
Yes, so we will. We already have effectively a sort of framework group. So in all of these areas where policy is fully devolved, we've been setting up frameworks so that we can coordinate policy and learn from one another. And we're also, in parallel to that, planning to set up something called the UK Agricultural Partnership. And that's going to effectively bring together academics, farmers, representatives from the devolved administrations, periodically on technical issues, so that we can share experiences that we've got on our respective policies, learn from one another. And I think if we get this right, what we'll actually see is that each part of the UK on a similar journey, because they've got similar ambitions for the environment, that we can learn from one another, that we can understand where landscapes are different and behave in different ways, and so policies need to be different. But where fundamentally we will see good ideas being adopted and bad ideas left behind, and that will be a healthy situation where it'll be a test bed of different approaches, and we can see the whole UK moving forward. So there'll undoubtedly be quite wider policy differences at the end of that 7 years between the different parts of the UK. I think that Northern Ireland are likely to stay closer to the EU system, since they'll have the shared border with the Irish Republic. I think Wales will be in a similar place to England, and Scotland may be somewhere in between. But I think we'll see everybody moving on a similar type of trajectory.
Thank you for that. Yes, last night in the committee stage of the Environment Bill, there was a lot of questions about how you could have a different river policy when a river went from Wales to England or Scotland to England. And it has to be said there wasn't any very, very good answers about that, except that it might be sort of loads of fish singing and dancing at the border.
This isn't a new problem, because rivers have always crossed borders, and so we already have concordats in place, and what happens with each river that's on both sides of a border, they effectively share out the responsibilities. And so there will be some watercourses where the Environment Agency would take responsibility for waters on the Scottish side of the border and vice versa.
Okay, thank you. Question over there, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Derek Wilkinson, I'm a vegetable grower in Worcestershire. George, you talk about the challenge of keeping the environmental lobbies and the farmers happy. But one area where we are joined up is on exporting environmental footprint. And in particular draw reference to pesticide approval, where here we've banned neonicotinoids, for example. And I'm not trying to say whether that was a right or wrong decision. And yet we're quite happy to import bread-making wheats from North America, oilseed rape from Eastern Europe, where these products are still allowed. How do you justify that, and is that going to change?
Thank you for the question.
No, it is a legitimate point that as we seek to open up markets around the world, we do have to be conscious of some of those that have got a more negative environmental impact, those that perhaps aren't doing their share on things like climate change. And that's why one of the areas that's being explored, but it's early days, it'll be difficult to perfect this, but we're looking at it, is in the area of a carbon border tax, for instance, so that if you're going to open your markets to other countries, those that have got a very high carbon footprint, you need some way of accounting for that if you're going to allow their goods to trade. Otherwise, there's a danger that there isn't an incentive on them to take the difficult decisions that responsible nations on Earth are taking. So there are some things that we're looking at, but equally there will always be certain challenges of this sort. When it comes to maximum residue limits, obviously, we set that ourselves as a country, and so that will disqualify the use of some pesticides in other countries. The other thing that we're willing to do and have used with some, but not all, of our trading partners is using tariff policy to recognise where you have lower standards on some of these matters. So it's through a combination really of SPS measures on things like maximum residue limits and potentially tariff policy in some areas too.
I can't resist but ask you about the Australian trade deal and the question, say, of, the amount of sugar that's going to come in, but more particularly about the Australian practice of mulesing, which, in case anyone doesn't know, means stripping the back skin off a lamb so that it then won't contract flies as it grows up. It's extremely inhumane and wouldn't pass our animal welfare standards. And I understand that people in DEFRA were fairly unhappy about that, but the Department of Trade thought it was fine. Can you comment?
Well, Rosie, you know the way collective government works is you have a discussion in private and then a public consensus. And so but what I would say, look, in the context of this, generally speaking, in most areas, Australia has animal welfare standards that are recognised as good around the world. They're rated on some of those as high. There are, though, some important areas where they don't. And so on pigs and poultry, their standards fall a long way behind us at the moment, although they're not serious producers in those areas. And when it comes to mulesing, we will be trying to get Australia to end that practice. And New Zealand did. New Zealand used to do this as well until 2018, when they fully abolished the practice. And one of the reasons they did that is that they found, to be blunt, that the British retail market was saying that they would not take produce and lamb from farms that had allowed that practice to take place. And so, we have a very sophisticated market in the UK. New Zealand understand that, so they banned the practice of mulesing in order to raise their acceptability. I suspect what we'll see is reputable retailers in the UK won't choose to buy Australian meat over New Zealand meat unless and until the Australians address this issue.
Hang on a second. So you mean you're leaving it to the retailers to enforce the standard and the government isn't taking it?
We have a chapter, there's a chapter in the agreement on animal welfare and animal welfare cooperation, and we will be using the provisions of that to be encouraging Australia to change this practice.
Ooh, I want you to more than encourage. Next question. Thank you.
Richard Guterbach. I work in the bioenergy sector and am involved in a report by the Royal Agricultural Society on the decarbonisation of agriculture. One of the many elephants in the room as far as farming is concerned is the support for diesel, the subsidy of diesel, the red diesel subsidy. Are there plans to review that in the next few years as we move towards 2030? And at the same time, what more can be done to help farmers to actually produce their own energy, bioenergy from various sources, to actually fuel themselves in the future?
Thank you.
The Treasury have looked at this issue of red diesel, agricultural diesel, and I've made a sort of first step in terms of where it's used in vehicles, non-agricultural sectors. And it used to be used on airports and so on. They have removed the tax exemption that existed for that and taken some of those sectors outside. And I think they've done something similar on construction as well. I think when it comes to agricultural red diesel, it could only really be something that you could consider once there are alternative fuel sources to fuel a tractor. And people tell me that for small tractors, you're now starting to see some electrically powered tractors becoming possible, but only at the very small end. And the sort of power and the torque required for the foreseeable future probably still needs a diesel engine. And if you therefore tax people without giving them an alternative they could switch to, all you do is add costs to fuel prices, or worse still, linking to our earlier question, export pollution to other parts of the world. So I think it's something that could be considered once alternative power sources are identified, and those remain some way off. I mean, some people say it might be, hydrogen power at some stage, but I think, all of that is some way off for now.
Okay, we can take one more question.
Hello.
Again.
Hello.
All right, thank you.
Hello, Rosie.
Yes.
I'm back here. Pete Richardson, organic horticulturalist. We're seeing a grand crossover here at this festival between Regen Ag and organic. And we've heard a lot about the public good from the government, but we haven't really got, as organic farmers and growers, we haven't really got any answers or any indication if organic is going to be supported in elms and going forward. So my question really is, as growers and farmers, what can we expect? Because this is an amazing event, and I think this is the way forward. And we're all very excited about what's going on here, but we have not got any indication that our system, which has been in place for decades, organic systems and licensing and certification, and proven system, but hasn't actually been recognised at all by the government yet. And we are working closely with the government, but we really have no indication yet whether organic is going to be recognised. Thank you, George.
Thank you. Okay, your last answer.
Well, it will be recognised, absolutely, but what's unresolved yet is the extent to which it's recognised through there being a bespoke organic scheme, which I think the organic sector would prefer to have, or whether it's recognised in the sense that it will be able to access all sorts of incentive payments under both sustainable farming incentive, local nature recovery and landscape recovery that would support its work. So we're looking at this. I'm very much open to there being a bespoke organic module, if that's what the advice is, makes this work. Because one of the things I'm very clear about is as we go through this transition, we have to be very mindful that there are a lot of farms out there, including some of you in this room, that are already doing the right thing. There will be farmers that are already quite heavily invested in countryside stewardship. And there's a danger that in the case of organics, there's not much more they can do to fit this objective. And if we pull away the basic payment scheme, but don't have a corresponding increase in the payments they're getting for the public goods they're providing, we won't have done a clever day's work, because we might actually paradoxically lose the people that have been doing the right thing and undermine their viability and put all of the money to people that have been doing, if I can put it this way, the wrong thing in this context in recent decades, but then decide to have a change of heart. So we are very conscious that during this transition, we have to think about the financial viability of those farm types, some of them heavily in CS, countryside stewardship, some of them organic, to make sure that their model remains viable.
Well, George, thank you so much. I mean, I think we all have a really clear idea for just how complicated it is, how much you've got to think about, how many different sectors have to be represented, and also just how incredibly important it is. And thank you so much for coming and talking to us today and sharing your passion and your insights. And we all wish you really the best of luck, because I know it's tough running DEFRA, and you've got such an amazing remit, and it's so important, and it's great you're in the job you're in. So thank you.